All right, so I will start. I am Sara Edwards. I am one of the birth to 3 educators from the Illinois School for the Visually Impaired. I usually am on here with Julia Bowman, but she could not join us today. So it is me, and I have 2 of my favorite professionals, Samantha Zoner and Carol Otton. I'll let you introduce them, or I'll let you or them introduce themselves here in a minute. But today we are going to talk about tough conversations with parents. Before I was an educator for ISVI, I actually did something completely unrelated. I was not a teacher, but I had 2 small children who are both blind, and they have been diagnosed with LCA. So I went through the early intervention process and obviously the school process. And, I had these conversations as a parent. So I've been on both sides of the table. So I think that these conversations are very difficult for us to have with our families, but they're extremely important to have and to be honest with our families as well. One of the things that Julie and I talk about, if you've caught any of our seminars on vision and development, we often refer to Kay Farrell, who's the author of the Reach Out and Teach Strategies book. And, we talk about this because we often get asked, how much does my child's vision loss impact their development? And that's overall, their cognitive, their motor, their speech, their social. So we often get asked that. And Kay Farrell has told us in the book that really the extent and how much the vision loss affects their development really comes back to our understanding, the caregivers and the providers or educators understanding of how it can affect their development and what can we do to help them. So I think that again, these are extremely important conversations. So I am going to let Carol and Samantha introduce themselves, and then we will open up some discussion. We have some questions that we'll start. And then if there's anything you'd like to add or any specific questions you'd like to ask, just go ahead and put those in the chat. So Carol, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Carol Otton, and I am a developmental therapist for orientation and mobility. That's what we're called in Illinois when we work in early intervention. I am a certified O&M specialist. I recently retired after 35 years of working in the school district. And for probably 25 of those years, I was also doing early intervention, first within the school district when it was provided through the schools in Illinois. And then when we went to our current provider through the Department of Human Services. I just typically provide orientation and mobility. I am also certified as a vision teacher, but I currently am just doing O&M. That's a need that we really need in Illinois as well.
I'm Samantha Zoner. I've been teaching as a TVI for 8 years, and I think I've been in early intervention, for 5, Sara?
I think so.
And so then in early intervention, I'm the developmental therapist of vision, and I usually pick up around 8 families with varying like weekly or biweekly or monthly.
And you also work in the schools.
Yep. And so in my school job, I work from 3 years old up to 14 because my students go to a different high school.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. And again, welcome. And I'm so glad that you're able to join us today. So I think we're going to start off with, one of the most common questions I think we get is, what can my baby see? What can my child see? We get a lot of questions about their diagnosis, the prognosis, if it's a degenerative condition, how do we communicate that with parents as far as not overwhelming them? But again, like I mentioned before, we want to be honest with them. You want me to call on you?
I was trying to be nice. I always jump in first. So I was really trying hard. I was like, don't talk too much. Okay, so actually, I just picked up a new family, and that was, of course, was one of the first questions they asked me. And I'm really honest with my families, and I tell them that nobody truly knows what your child can and cannot see. Our job is to see how can we use what they do have functionally Now, does that mean I'm using your tactual sense? Most likely. Are we really working on your hearing sense? Are we trying to see at what distance? Like, I do come at it with, let's use all of your senses together to see how you can explore your environment. But at the same time, I also tell them, I'll try my best. My one little baby came to me at 10 months. There's not much. I can't hold up cards. I can't be like, oh, she's 2,400. Like, I really say, okay, well, we can tell she's seeing this red shiny object from 2 inches from her face. At this time, I can tell you she can see 2 inches from her face. And so that's what I do. And I tell my families, as the child gets older, we'll be able to tell more things based off of what activities we're doing with the child, what they're able to perceive. We'll be able to tell if there's a field neglect, if they startle every time we come up on the right side. So I really try to explain to them how we need to really just be focused and pick up on these little hints of what are they able to see. And it's a growing process that nobody can tell you until the child can talk themselves what it is the child is actually seeing. And even at that point, I tell them that child has no reference of what we see. So I try to explain that too, is I don't know if the parents see the same way as me. And when you kind of put it that way, then they're like, oh, okay, well, now I get why all these doctors are saying, well, I can't tell you.
Yeah, and I was going to go along with that, Samantha, with functional vision. And so often as the orientation mobility specialist, I'm coming in after the families have met with the vision therapist or the TVI. We're going to go with TVI. And oftentimes I relate it to functional vision. So we already might know, does the child see the difference between the carpet and the hardwood floors or the tile? Is the child reaching for their Cheerios on their high chair? You know, we're looking at how the child uses their vision in their daily routines. And then when I come in, I want to extend the use of vision for maybe more distance things. So I might encourage the parents to do things with big balls, you know, put things in further spots away from what they typically do, because really the family or the parents are going to be the best. They're going to be the best people who can tell us what their child sees when they're working with them and with them all the time. I also talk about the communication part, that when the child does begin to talk and they can identify their favorite toy verbally that's on the couch and maybe they're in their high chair, that we are getting some information about how far they see at that point as well. But again, we're using all the senses, and I know specifically often the parents are really asking for the visual input. And we talk, I just give them that information, as we do everyone. Talk about what you see, label it, and then hopefully we'll get that information back from the child, and that helps us to see where they're going to go.
Right. And I like how you say like the functional vision, because how many times have we, had families that have come back from the eye doctor, maybe because they've been obviously referred, and they tell us, the eye doctor says, well, he can't see. And we know he or she can, because we've presented materials and they're obviously reacting, but they're told that their child's blind and those words are used, they can't see. And that's obviously, as a parent, I can relate to that. That's very difficult. But most of the time, obviously not all of the time, I have two of my own, but most of the time they do visually react. They are able to see the items we're presented. It's just how we're presenting them. So I think it's extremely important too. And I think it's been obviously challenging during the pandemic to be in the homes and show them, like, we present something and point out, your child is visually aware of this. And maybe, we talk about this all the time. You have to look at the whole child and how they reacted. Maybe they became very still, once we presented something, or maybe they became very vocal. I mean, those are all ways of them communicating that they know something changed visually. So I like being back in the homes so that the families can obviously see us do that and model that after. So, because those are extremely.
I was going to say, one of the things I try to be positive about is if we know that the child has some really good light perception, or we know that they can follow a sidewalk, like if they can walk on the sidewalk and then stop and step on the grass. I talk about it, but that they still might be a Braille reader. We're thinking then I'm positive about the fact that, oh, they have so much vision for travel. You know, travel will be so much easier because we know that they can follow a straight line, they can follow the sidewalk. So I try to encourage them in other ways if I feel that they need that encouragement. I mean, some parents are hands-on and they're ready to get their, just get right in there with all of the skills, pre-Braille skills, everything. But I do try to be positive when we can be about what we do know about their vision.
And I want to piggyback off of a little bit of what both of you said. My family that I just had yesterday, the mom came and told me the eye doctor, the child's developing cataracts now on top of other eye conditions. And she asked, well, when are we going to do this surgery? And the doctor came back and said, well, she's blind, so it doesn't matter. It's just cosmetic at this point. But we know, because we see this child interacting, she does have light perception. She does see 4 inches from her face. She can attend to different toys. And so this mom was so frustrated and she's like, am I crazy? And I said, no, I've been in the home. You're not crazy. We see this. We know this. You can literally go stand next to her right now and put one of her favorite bells next to you, and she reaches out to grab it. Granted, she's not making perfect contact, but she also has a lot of visual impairments going on, right? So it's really then coming back and saying to the mom, just because you got this negative feedback from a doctor, who, by the way, is a pediatrician and not the ophthalmologist, doesn't truly know what she's talking about in this situation. And so I think it's those hard conversations that we have to have, but also I tell my families from the beginning, I'm very honest. I will never give you false hope, because there's nothing worse than doing that. But if I say I see something, it's because I truly do see it. I'm never going to tell you your child sees something that I don't see happening. And I think that's when you can have some of those really good conversations with families, because they know that you're not sitting there lying to them, giving them false hope.
Right, I agree. And one of our participants said, Trisha, she says, I've used LEA paddles and converted the outcome to a smell and acuity. I have used Dr. Struck to compare my findings to his VEP sweeps, and they do match. This, along with the FEE in natural environments, helps parents understand. I think too, like helping parents understand, I just did an evaluation this morning in the home. And because of our FEEs, and they don't understand what we're doing. So I always explain to them, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking to see if they'll shift his, if he'll shift his gaze from one picture to another. I'm looking to see if he's tracking. I'm trying to get a distance on him, those types of things, so that they have a little bit understanding of what we're doing. And then when they see the reactions, they're like, oh, yes, there is something.
For some
Go ahead.
For some of my families, not only when I'm doing the tracking, like what you said, Sarah, I'll also explain why we need that skill. So I'll say, when she's older, we want to see if she's going to be a large print reader, we want to be able to see that she can track so it can go into reading. So sometimes I'll say the now, and then I'll say the future of why we need this skill.
And I love when the family can watch the child do some of those activities, the visual scanning. Sometimes they don't see it. And oftentimes when I'm doing something with bean bags or rubber circles in the grass, where I want to see if the child without contrast or with contrast can find some things, it can be really positive for the parents when they don't even think that their child might be able to see something like that. And I love to provide those opportunities so then the family can carry over and do the same types of things that we have shown them.
I agree. And then I just had another, Brenda, she said, this is also all important if the family has been told the child's eyes are fine, but we suspect they have CVI. So that's a whole other discussion when we suspect CVI, but they've not been told that by the doctor. And, I don't know about you guys, like if you start those conversations with the parents. I did, in fact, my eval this morning, I'll be perfectly blunt, that's exactly what it was. I went in under a diagnosis of HIE, obviously vision concerns, and with the pandemic, they've yet to get in, but with everything, obviously there's a suspicion of CBI. So I did have that conversation, but I'm very honest with them. I'm very like, I'm not a doctor, I'm not diagnosing, but due to the medical history and due to what we're seeing, like this is, some of the strategies that we would implement. And many a times the strategies are no different, whether the child had CBI or not, but it's helping him visually attend, it's helping him fixate, for all of those basic visual skills. So how do you, I know Carol, a TBI has already been in place if you're working with a child, but Sam, if you have a child that's suspicious of CBI, how do you approach that with a parent?
So it's a little bit different. So in the school age, we have to be really cautious over how we say everything so we don't have to pay the bill, right? And so in the school age, I've learned to tiptoe, kind of drop hints, maybe put pamphlets in binders, things like that. In EI, I'll kind of ask some of the questions. So if I have this suspicion that this might be CBI, I'll kind of go over some of the questions as if I was going to do the CBI rating. See where they fall there. If there's enough positives where I have in my gut, ooh, this might be it, I'll ask the parents, has the doctor ever said anything about cortical visual impairment before? What are your thoughts? Let me go over this with you. Does this sound to you like this could be your child? Same thing as you. I'm not diagnosing. I'm just saying your child's acting very similar to some of my other students, and I would hate for something to be missed, especially when this is the only eye condition that can get better. And so that's always how I word it. And families are really receptive of it. I had one family where the doctor went back and forth and thought, well, for one, the doctor thought DTV was vision therapy. So he was saying I was hocus pocus to begin with. But then I wrote up a little thing and said, look at these 10 characteristics. This child's demonstrating 9 of them. And he has this and he has this. And therefore, to me, this is very similar. Could you just consider it? Will you just look at it? And the mom brought it to the eye doctor and was like, this is what the therapist brought me. And she's saying this. Can you explain to me why he doesn't have this? So I think it goes back and forth. I've had some really great relationships with some different ophthalmologists out here where they'll send me a message and say, can you write me a monthly update of how this child's doing? And then you have the other ones who think that we're vision therapy and think, whatever they do. So I think it all depends on the family and the doctors that they're using. But I've done some write-ups just to say, this is what I'm seeing, and then I sign it, and it's in their hands at that point. I did what I feel is as much as I could do without jumping lanes.
Right. I agree. And then, and I have found too that many of the families, when I say CBI, they've already done their research. They've already talked to other families. They've been, on online support groups that, maybe again, maybe an HIE support group or a CP, so they've already talking to parents. And most of the time, this is not new information and that they've heard. And so then I would almost feel worse if I didn't bring it up to them as the professional, hey, we're going to keep an eye on this. And like you, Sammy, I tell them or suggest to them that when they see that ophthalmologist again, bring that up. These are concerns. These are some of the visual reactions that we're seeing when we present materials. They kind of align with that CBI. I also explain to families that some of our eye doctors here where I'm at, they may not hurry up and give that diagnosis, particularly if the child's very young, like the one this morning is only a few months old. So they may wait a little bit, to see if those reactions improve. And that's okay too, because again, I'm not going to change my strategies will be the same with or without that diagnosis, in order to encourage that tracking and the visual attention. So
I think that it's important, like Sara said, to actually tell the parents that that's okay if they don't diagnose it right away. That strategies and skills that we're all using in Birth to 3 are going to stay the same no matter what. It's the same with the diagnosis of autism. We know sometimes at 2 or 2.5, somebody might be talking autism, but maybe not a hurry to have that diagnosed again. And I think it's comforting if we let the parents know that we don't feel that we need that diagnosis in order to provide the services that we're asked to provide. And then also maybe helping the family reach out to someone who could help with that diagnosis. I know here in Chicago, we have so many different pediatric ophthalmologists, and we do know which ones are more comfortable with that diagnosis of CVI. And so possibly, you know, with experience and knowing who those are, helping the family to navigate to maybe meet with that professional.
Mhm. Yeah, and we don't, where I'm located, obviously we don't have, you know, the number of pediatric ophthalmologists as you, but we do have one that's pretty local that works quite a bit with Julia and I's local families. And so after, he may not be quick to diagnose, but after a while, you know, he'll say like, well, what does Sara say? Or what's Julia observing? And then he'll say, yeah, okay, they're on target, you know. So he really does value like what we're seeing in the homes, which I think is so important. And because we all know that regardless of the child's diagnosis or, you know, what their vision condition is, you know, you take them into those appointments, you know, unfamiliar environments and good mood, bad mood, and little pen light here and there, that's not really an accurate picture of what they can do. So I appreciate it when they actually ask, you know, what are we seeing as professionals, like in the home or possibly in the classroom. I was just checking. I've got another. Someone was asking about recordings. They are recording and they'll be out on APH's website after. At some point, Catherine can jump in at the end and let you know. Talking about conditions, as far as when they have questions, when they first get that diagnosis, for those conditions that are degenerative, how do you approach those? Carol, you kind of touched on it a little bit as far as, you know, if they have really good vision, you encourage them to use their vision. But if they have a degenerative condition, and we know as professionals that down the line, you know, it may be beneficial for them to have that Braille instruction or that O&M instruction. How do you approach those conversations, particularly with families, you know, with very little ones, because that's very difficult when they have very like good functional vision at this point, but you want to start having those conversations with them.
Right. And I think it depends on the parents and how much they're willing to accept the diagnosis initially. That kind of helps us to drive our conversations with them as we go through birth to 3 with them. Some parents are right on board. For example, Sara and I are working with a little one, and there is a possibility of her vision changing, and her mom is already interested in her at least being familiar to a cane, and she's 2. She probably isn't going to use it right now every day or all the time. She's small, she's not strong, and we're introducing it. We're calling it her cane, we're having it in her home environment. And her mom and I have also had conversation that it's great to introduce this now. She may or may not even need it in her early years of preschool. But the point is, she will have a mobility specialist along the way, and we can welcome these changes, whatever services we feel are going to be necessary. I think when we know that they're going to be a Braille reader, and there are some possibilities maybe that their vision is going to change for the worse, it can be a little bit easier because we know that they're going to learn Braille. I've had a couple diagnoses where students are going to lose their hearing over time, but it's going to be a long time. And so we don't really, those parents go on like the Facebook pages for some of those diagnoses, and they learn about it. Oftentimes, if I have a student who is 30 and has just recently started to lose the hearing, then I kind of share that, that every person is different. However, here's one of my students that I had when he was in junior high. He's 30 years old now, and he's just starting to lose his hearing. So we try, again, we try to be comforting, but then to be honest and give them the information that they need. I do always talk about a cane, whether or not I feel that the child will even use a cane. I think that helps with the parents understanding and accepting. So we have students, or I did actually, as a mobility specialist in the school district, who didn't need a cane all the time. And maybe they needed it for outdoor travel and for street crossings. And at 2 years old, I still, with all my experience, can't know if a child is going to need it every day when they're walking, unless they're, significantly visually impaired. So I share that, and I'll tell families, one of the things I say is that they will use a cane. It could be part-time, it could be all the time, it could be just indoors or just outdoors. We will look at that and evaluate it throughout the school years.
I think what I do with my students' families is if we think that they may be a Braille reader, and it's one of those, the cases that you have that like you walk in the door and 100% this child's going to be a Braille reader, right? There's no doubt in your mind. I still kind of I just see where the parents are at in the grieving cycle before mentioning it. If they're already so down because they just got this diagnosis, I'm not kicking them while they're there, right? Because there's typically a 3-year span when they're still in my caseload, and I can start to work on those pre-Braille skills and get them on board that way, and then just start to sneak in some Braille books and then say, this might be a medium that they're going to use to read. For some of the families that you can tell, like they just accepted the diagnosis and they're moving forward and they just want the information, I'll tell them, I think Braille is a high possibility to be in your child's future. And it's a tool in their toolbox. No education's ever lost. Worst case scenario, they're going to be really actually, they'll know what's going on their finger pads. And I think the toughest conversation I had was a family that the child had retinoblastoma. They got the cancer treatments. The retinoblastoma came back. We were unsure if it was going to spread to the other eye, but the other eye right now does have some really good vision. And I told the family, this is your choice. I'm telling you, we can start to teach her Braille just in case she'll need it, because we know that typically it comes over to the other eye, or we don't have to, and we work on visual functioning skills. And the mom looked at me and said, what would you do if she was your child? And I said, no education is ever lost, and I would teach her Braille. At a minimum, you're giving her a job in the future. She can be a TVI. And the mom laughed and said, that's what I'll do then. So I think it's sometimes even telling the families, if this child is mine, this is what I would do, but give them options too, because sometimes I think that's what's missing is they go to the doctors and the doctors say, you need to do this, this, and this. And they're just like, that's just what I have to do. But let them have choice too over what their child's future looks like.
Right. And I think in early intervention, we do have that flexibility, because so many of the skills or the activities that we introduce are those pre-Braille activities anyway. But that's helping with development in all areas. I mean, it's not just, Braille introduction, but it's helping with concept development, cognitive development, language. I mean, it just, those tactile discriminations and identifications and all of that can fall in so many areas of development that it's not like Braille specific. So we would work on those anyway, whether they're Braille readers, future Braille readers or not. For the kids that I work with, that I have a very strong suspicion that they will be Braille writers, then I will talk to the families about why we are doing these activities, to get their hands and their fingers ready, to get them on board. I've never had, knock on wood, I've never had a family that's been opposed to learning Braille. Even if their child, even if it's been on the fence, like, I don't know. I mean, when they enter school, everything's already big, everything's large print. I say all the time, like, I think they'll be okay in the beginning, but as they get older and that print gets smaller and things become, more visually complex, and they can have more eye fatigue and think like, thinking having Braille in their back pocket's not a bad idea, to bring that out. But we can't predict what they'll need in the future. So
maybe Sara, you could share. Maybe you could share with us from your perspective, but when you were a parent, how that felt. You knew your children had LCA, but you really maybe didn't know to the extent. Did you always know they were going to be Braille readers, and how did that feel as a parent?
Yeah, with Ethan, because he's our oldest, I mean, we pretty much knew off the bat that he would be a Braille reader because he only had light perception. And we were able to recognize that at a very young age. So, I mean, we knew that that's just the route he was going to go. So for us, obviously I had no problems with that, but it took me on a different route as a parent as to how am I going to communicate with my child? You know, and again, like I mentioned before, I was not a teacher when he was, you know, when we were just learning of Ethan's diagnosis. So I didn't know Braille. I didn't know anything about raising a child with vision loss. So my concern then was more, what can I do as a parent to help him? You know, and then I was thinking further down the road, like when he brings homework home, how am I going to help him? You know, I don't know how to read Braille and all this, and how am I going to, if he wants me to check something, how am I going to do that? So that just took me down a whole different road, which obviously led me to be a teacher. But so we had no, like, we just knew off the bat that that's the route that we would be going. So yeah. I think though that those are important conversations to have when families are still in early intervention, because I feel like if they get hit with that during that transition, then right.
It's not nice. It's just not nice because I have had that happen to me multiple times, and it's just not nice.
Right. I feel like that, but I feel like if we're doing that, then we have failed as as a professional. Like then
Right.
we failed the family in that we didn't talk about that with them, and then we just kind of, you know, transitioned them with the thought of like, let the school figure it out because we don't know. But I feel then that was a poor choice on the profession, you know, on our side, if that's what happened. So I would never want to transition a family and not at least have the conversation of, okay, so we didn't focus specifically on Braille here while he was in early intervention, but just so you know, this could be a conversation you will be having, you know, with your team in the school.
And I recently had a family, honestly, my very first time, that the parent was just downright opposed to an introduction of a cane for her daughter, and it was somewhat cultural, as well as she just didn't think she needed it. But along with that, she also was looking for doctors who were going to, other ophthalmologists who were going to give her different information. So there was an acceptance part. And then, you know, she is going to use a cane at some point. And I guess I came from the side that I brought the cane, I showed it to the family. We don't have to leave it, but this is a tool that she might use in the future for her safety. And I really spoke more of the safety and independence, because I feel like parents want to know that their child will be independent. And again, this is one of the tools in the toolbox for future. And then the weather got a little bit better and she was getting closer to turning 3. Great skills, a great walker. She could see the difference between the sidewalk and the grass. But mom still, when I would go, she would say, no cane, no cane. So I brought a grocery cart and she pushed the grocery cart. And actually it was during the pandemic between March and June that she was aging to 3 to go into her school district. And I have a great relationship with the mobility teacher in TVI. And we talked about that transition, that it might be difficult when she does start. There's some acceptance issues. And just about right before the school year ended, the mobility specialist in the school district sent me a picture of her using an adaptive mobility device at school. But right now it's only at school. But mom is okay with that. So again, steps, baby steps. She's 3, maybe 4 now. She's got plenty of time, but it's a tool for independence. So we do what we have to do as professionals to make those steps easier for families, I think.
Right. And by the way, I found a grocery cart on the curb the other day on my walk, and it was in mint perfect condition. And I was like, oh my gosh. It was like 5 blocks away. So I was walking home with the grocery cart. So I was like, Carol's going to be so proud of me. Love it.
Good.
Okay, so we had one question. What are some of the favorite resources you share with parents regarding learning Braille? And I'm not sure, Lori, if you meant for like the parents learning Braille or as far as like teaching kids Braille. I know there's a parents to learn Braille. Okay. Oh gosh, what is it? Dots for Families Past the Literacy, and they have a whole series of lessons. Do you use that one a lot too, Sam?
I used to, but I found that my families wouldn't do the lessons then. So what I actually do is I tell them to pick a day on the weekend, and typically like the grandparents come over, I bring over some Braille writers, and I teach them the alphabet, grade 1, because that's what their kids are going to do. And as most of us know, it takes about 20 minutes to learn grade 1. So I do that. I let them play on the Braille writer. We talk about it. I make these cute little, well, I think they're cute, so I guess I'm biased there, but I make these little file folder games for my students that look like they're like little playthings. Like my one student's one this week is like a donut shop. So it's just the 3 letters of her name, L-A and N, and she goes through and she reads the Braille and she sorts. So it's visual still because she still has vision, and then she's feeling the Braille and she's putting it on. And then I tell the families, because I leave them behind, like, you can practice with this too. Like you can like sit there and feel it while you're watching TV. Like you don't have to have your eyes on it. That's the point of Braille. And say, oh, I feel that this is an L. Oh, I know this is an A. So I do things like that. And they seem to really like the games because the kids like to see the parents play the games too. And I like it because then I have an ungodly amount of these games that I can use in the future for other kids.
I have given, I've talked to parents about the Just Enough to Know Better, which that's one program. And also the Braille, I'm losing my thought right now. The Braille Bee. Wait, no.
Braille Buzz.
The Braille Buzz. Yeah. So even though we use that with kids, I have a family that has like a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they're doing it together, looking at it as a family. Just some information. And boy, seedlings, I mean, not that they're learning Braille, but seedlings is the best place to connect these families with. I have families that follow their Instagram, and they are just right up there. They're sponsoring children, sending them Braille books. I mean, there's so many programs. Please connect your families to seedlings.
There's also, it's a little more expensive, and I usually only get it for my older kids that are going to learn Braille, the Taptillo device. There's an app that the parents can put on their phone, and it shows you the sim Braille, and then it activates the refreshable Braille. I mean, they're jumbo, so it's really for the younger kids, but they can get the idea. And then there's the manipulative where they make the cell. And I did that with 2 families that I've had when I was able to get some of those devices. And it's a pretty good program. The one family loved it a lot more than the other, but I think they're also more into like electronics than the other one.
Right. Yeah. And I know one of our participants, he included like the Hadley link and livebinders.com. I know Hadley, I believe they still do this. As a parent or a caregiver, you can take those Braille classes for free if your child is visually impaired. So that's a great resource. To back up that Path to Literacy, I think it's Dots for Families, and it does have multiple lessons. And like Sammy said, it's ideal if they have a Braille writer to practice with those lessons. Fortunately for the school I work for, we have a couple Braille writers that we can loan our families. So I've been able to do that for families that are serious about learning, so that they can, just go through those lessons kind of self-paced. For me personally, when I learned Braille, I actually self-taught it through that Just Enough to Know Better. My TBI and early intervention gave me that book, and I earmarked the page with the Braille alphabet. I still have it marked. It's like the best cheat sheet, ever. So I self-taught that. And then as Ethan and Elissa started, Elissa, I actually learned it with Ethan just because he was older. But then as he learned like the contractions as he was going through, I just learned it with him. I just learned all those contractions, and everything as he went through the process of learning the Braille code. So that's how I, oh, good. Just enough to know better. Yes. All right. So I always encourage families to know, to at least learn the basic Braille code. I even did a webinar not too long ago. Oh, actually there is, I think it's under APH. It's recorded. It teaches you the Braille code just very quickly. But I just think as as a caregiver, it just shows your child that somebody cares. It's just so isolating. I think, they could very well be the only child in their classroom that has Braille. They have a Braille writer and they have all these devices, and then they might even have an extra desk because they have all these books. I mean, they just have so much. And I feel like it can be so isolating because they're the only ones in the school or the classroom. And I think if we just take it, as a parent, take the time to learn that with them, it just shows like it is important, just like they're important. So we need to learn it with them. And then we can leave notes for them when they're younger. Everybody, always talks about like leaving the cute little notes in their child's lunch boxes. Well, you can too. You can just Braille out a cute little note or something. So I do think it's important to take the time. Oh, I think Catherine put a link out there to all the recorded webinars. And so there is one, it's called Braille 101. Okay, so to go back to the development, how do you, and this might be more so when the kids are, early in that early intervention stage, when they ask you about their development, is my child behind in in their development? Are they going to catch up? How do you approach that? Because as we know, many of our kids, it's not just a visual impairment, that we're working with. There could be other medical conditions and things that we have to take into consideration as well.
I like to work with the other therapists on the team, especially in a situation like this, when it could be if there is a cognitive issue. And again, some of this we don't really know, until maybe a little bit later. The social, not so much the social, the communication, the sensory, and the gross and fine motor. I really feel it's necessary. I don't want to make those decisions on my own. I don't have enough experience to say, I know when they're behind physically, but I also know that there is some catch up time. And so I really do work with the team when parents have the questions, and when I see something that I'm often wondering myself, then I'll reach out to another therapist to sort of go through that with me. Some of us in Illinois, we talk amongst ourselves because so many of us work together. Sometimes we see a speech delay when there isn't a gross motor delay. And it's like, wow, they're just moving. They were walking at 14 months and they have such great skills, but they're not communicating. And again, I comfort the family by telling them, we need time. Sometimes speech is a little delayed, sometimes it's not. And every child, again, is so different that we don't want to scare them or make them nervous about other issues, because we all, as providers of services, we've all seen them catch up on some of these skills. And especially when we were talking about relating the language into what they can see. I have learned that between 2 and 3 years old, once they start talking, I've learned that the child can see so much better than maybe we all thought initially. And once they start communicating. So I think it's really important to team with the other therapists in those specialty areas along with ourselves.
I agree, because I think it's so important to help educate the other disciplines as well. Because I think sometimes we, our families may get the like, well, they can't do this because they can't see. Well, they can. We're just going to find other ways, to teach. I mean, it's like they may not have the same opportunities, they may not have the same experiences. We talk all the time about, and it's like a record player, but that incidental learning, right? Like our kids lose out on that. They just can't watch and learn like their sighted peers can. So they just need that formal instruction that their peers do not, but they can still learn the same skills. It just they will learn different. So it's definitely, critical to work with the entire team. All right. How about when they ask you about what their child's future is going to look like? Will my child be able to drive? Are they, what kind of school are they going to go to? Can they go to a regular school, or will they have to go to a special school, or will they be able to drive? Will they be able to go to college, have a job, things like that, as they are just learning about their child's condition?
I feel like that question is always asked right at the most vulnerable time for the family too. And so I always, no matter what time it's, and usually it's always like at the end of the session too. So in case like they don't like your response, like you're leaving, but I always, no matter what time, like let's say we're supposed to leave at 3, if they're asking me that question, you're staying for a while, right? Because at that point they're telling you they need you. And my one family, I think, and I got a message from this one family, and I ended up becoming really close with them. I had her 3 years ago, and the mom sent me a message and said, Is it okay that my parents come to the session tonight? And I was like, of course, invite whoever you want. You can have aunts and uncles too. Like, we're here to talk about your child. And so I walked in the door, and there was a bunch of family there, and you could tell there was some pressure from the older generations. And the mom asked, what is my daughter going to be able to do when she's older? Will she be able to drive? Will she be able to go to the neighborhood school? Can she ride a school bus? Will they allow her to attend? And I think a lot of those questions come from when this is the only visually impaired person that they've ever known. They don't have that back history. And so that's when you sit there and you talk about it. And I talk about my day job. And that's why I really love that I do both aspects, because then I can say, I can tell you about the future. And absolutely, your child can be in the schools. They're going to have a different programming. They're going to have a TBI that either comes in or pulls out. They may have an orientation mobility that other kids don't have, but sometimes that can get pulled out of PE because it's still physical activity. And really going in and answering each one of those questions. And you could see that so many of the questions the mom had on ammo, it was because all of these family members were attacking her, saying like, well, did you ask this, and this? And you could see the relief leaving her, because she could see that it's not like the olden days when the child did get shipped off. And I did say, we do have a school in the state that the children could attend to that's residential, but not all children have to go there unless that's what you choose. So it's not like someone's going to come into your home and take your child away from you. And that was one of that family's biggest fears, that they were going to lose their daughter because the state was going to come in and take her away.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's important. This is our time to shine and to educate families about the services for students with visual impairments in general. Now in Illinois, we may have different things, but we have a few resource rooms that are strictly for children, with visual impairments. It's a little bit unusual. Most of our services are provided through itinerant services, which is, I think, the majority. But I let the families know that there are some of those programs around. Some of our parents, I've seen a couple that might have moved to be closer to a resource program. But Samantha and I have both only worked in programs that are itinerant. And I think because I'm a little biased towards that, because I've seen it be successful. And so I always, if I have the opportunity, between, maybe 2.5 and 3, when the parents are also working with the transition service coordinator about what the opportunities will be when they're 3. If I have a child that I know will be successful with a preschool itinerant program, maybe it's their home school with a special ed early childhood, I will ask to have that family observe that child with a visual impairment. It hasn't often happened, but it can. And sometimes that's a nice way for a parent to feel more comfortable about what's happening in the future. There's so much online that they can observe and read. again, using resources that are out there so that they can see what are the different programs that are available.
Right. And I think too, one of the best things now, this was not available when my kids were younger, is just the online support. Now they can reach out and contact other families. They can contact other blind individuals, that are, in their 30s now, and they have a job. And so they're very willing to share their stories on these support groups. And I think that helps families. We also have the conferences here in our state, that get families together. And we, for our school that we do this for, then we also use older students, so that the families, when they have their little babies and their toddlers, but there's, 13-year-olds or 17-year-olds that are working in the classrooms and they have visual impairments, and these families, Sam, you help down there. And I think to give that opportunity, or for those families to have the opportunity to see what their child could be doing in 10 years is huge. And I think just as a parent, again, I took my child down there when he was 18 months old, and it totally opens up your eyes. I mean, I was a parent that thought, well, how are my children going to go to college? That's what I thought, because like you mentioned, Sam, I didn't know anybody who was blind. I had no experience, with that. And so that was one of my first thoughts. And I remember a family member said, well, why wouldn't he? And I was like, but how can he? And we just kept going back and forth. And she's like, he can. And here in the fall, he's going to college. So it's just that, stuff that you're not familiar with and you don't know. So I do think the online support groups are nice. I know working with families, I like to personally connect them with somebody that's like in their community or at least close. Right. Like, hey, I have a family that's 15 minutes away, their child 6 months age difference, very, and just connecting them in that way, because especially where I'm at and the communities are smaller, you probably do have the only visually impaired child like in your town, but there may be one that's, another family dealing with the same thing that's 15 minutes away or 45 minutes away. So I try to connect them so that they can share stories as well.
I think the Facebook pages have been amazing for parents. I know there's just so much social media. So many of our families, even before I've even been into the home, have already told me they've connected. This morning, one of my moms of a child with LCA said that she heard from her friend in Singapore just this morning about some research going on. And she's already so excited to talk to her ophthalmologist about it. And I just was like, wow, really? Singapore? That's so amazing. And so with all this technology, they are so much more able to make friends and again, establish some connections between the families, and so nice for them to have that. We can help do that, but we have a little bit of it, we don't really know what it's like to be the parent, or not all of us.
Yeah, I kind of know a little bit, but
yeah.
But that's also, I don't I'll share my story. Like if they ask, they've learned. I mean, I just don't go in and say I have two parents or I have two kids who are blind. That's not how I start. But for the families that we have those conversations, obviously, eventually they learn that I, have two kids, and they'll say, do you mind me asking questions? Absolutely not. Ask, because I didn't have anybody, to ask. I swam these waters basically alone. So please do, and do you want to talk to my kids? They'll talk to you, they'll give you firsthand experience, which I think that's exactly what they need. You don't even really need to hear it from me, other than they can do this, they can do more than what we ever think. But I think they also need to hear it from the individuals themselves directly. Because be very honest about what challenges they run into, what obstacles do they run into, but how do they, get around that? So, Yeah. So I think connecting them is huge, huge.
Another thing that I did is a little bit different because it's CVI. One of my school age families that I work with, they've given me permission to share videos of what their daughter can do now. And so a lot of my early intervention families, they'll say like, will they ever get out of phase one? Can they ever read? Like, and they'll ask those questions. And then I'll say, like, I have permission from my one family. I can show you this video, and I can show a video of this cute little third grader reading and writing. And I'm like, it's there. We have a lot to fight through, right? We have a lot of work to do, but we can get your child there just like we got her there. And I think that video too, of seeing some other children with a visual impairment, they're able to be like, okay, we can do this too. So I think sometimes even seeing that, because my one family has said how helpful it was that my other family shared videos of where the child can be in the future.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I do the same. Make sure that I ask parents of great videos that I have. And oftentimes we'll say, for example, we're trying to introduce a cane. Well, here he was using, a hula hoop as a mobility device. And now 6 months later, he's pushing a cane. So yeah, I think it's nice for light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to touch base too, Sam. You had mentioned, as far as like what schools, do you go to a residential school, and a lot of families do when they first think like, oh, my child has to go to a residential school. And that's one of those areas when I speak with families, I work for our state's residential school. Yeah. I work for them. My kids didn't go there. They were able to stay in, they don't go to their home school district. We're fortunate to have a university lab school that has a vision program. So we're still like within our community, but not in our home school. But again, especially in Illinois, we have very rural communities. And so having those discussions about it's very honest when I have a family that says, but I don't think my school district has ever had a child come through, with their needs. And they're pretty accurate. They've not, we'll go into the IFSP meetings, and that's it is very scary because they're so rural that they have not had students.
I had that happen actually several years ago. It was the weirdest thing ever, and I swore something was in the water. There was 3 kids in the same rural community, and they were like, well, and I was like, it's a really small field. Like, I can pretty much tell you who your child's going to. So I contacted the school. I was like, who's your TVI? And we were trying to communicate back that way. And it was funny. The director was like, well, we've been meaning to ask you, will you be our TVI? And I was like, what? I have another job. But they couldn't. And they said, they're like, if we can't find someone to come in, will you continue to teach these kids after school hours and on weekends? So, because and that was the part that I told the families I was confident about, is they fought really hard to keep these kids and they're like, we will have you come in and train, and we will have our staff after school, and we'll buy whatever we need to buy. These are our kids. And that's the one part of rural communities that I think is different than the city kids, is that these are their people. And when you get into one of those and these are their kids and they want to make it right, that's why sometimes, like, you don't have to go to the resource room, because if you give your district a chance, not all deserve the chance. I'll say that too. But some of them, like that one district, they moved heaven and earth to make those kids successful. And I tell people, they now have a TVI there. And I don't hesitate when I say, you're in good hands. I know who you're going to, and your child's going to be taken care of. So I think that's part of it too, is really feeling out the district and making contact with them before they age out too. Right. And that's helpful too. I reach out the year before they age out, because as a school TVI, please tell me if your child's coming to me before March, because I don't want that bomb in March. So that's what I do, with parent permission, obviously.
Right. I do the same thing. I always contact the coordinator or the TVI that they're going into, like you said, with approval, with everybody's, signed off saying that it's okay, release of information, just to, give them a heads up. Just because I know in one area, 1 year between vision and hearing within the school year, they were getting 8 students coming out of early intervention. that school had to know. They had to know this information because that was going to be hiring more personnel, readjusting their program. I mean, that's just huge information. So, all right. So I have one final question, and then we can see if anybody has additional ones. I can answer this, but I just want to see how you approach it. How, if families ask about extended family? I know, Sam, you kind of touched on it with your family that seemed to kind of be feeding, your mom with a bunch of questions, but how do you help them deal with extended family as far as like questions or concerns, or helping them advocate, for what their children need?
I'll just jump in real fast because I slightly touched on already. I always tell my families from the beginning they can invite whoever they want to our sessions. And typically it's the grandparents that show up. Occasionally it's like an aunt or an uncle. And then after the family gets comfortable with you, they'll start to tell you, oh, my grandma said this. And you're like, have your grandma come and I'll talk to them. Like, your child's gonna be able to do X, Y, and Z. Have them come and see what we do. Or I'll tell them if they're far away, I'm like, you can take a video. Like, this is your child. I'm in your home. You can record me. We'll show them your child can do something. She doesn't just sit here. And so that's kind of how I do it. But I think I go at it as all of our children have the utmost potential. And I'm never going to say that they're not going to get somewhere, because we don't know, because like what both of you said is they're babies. They might have a growth spurt from 3 to 4. They might have, this huge growth. And so I'm always like, don't cut them short just because they're tiny, and but that's just what I do.
Yeah, I welcome, of course, this is mostly before the pandemic started, but I would welcome if I was doing a home visit for the grandparents to be there. And seriously, often grandparents are available, or they might be watching the child, they might be just visiting. But there's been many sessions where grandparents, and they might ask different questions. Like, they're the ones who are asking, like, do they have to go to a special school? What is he really going to need a cane all the way down? And so it's so nice just to be able to establish that communication and to be honest with them. And again, I will do the same thing with videos. Like, I will say, well, feel free to send a video, or if you have questions, reach out to me and I can help them to understand. A lot of times it's about like, how much information do I give the child? Talk to them, tell them what's in their environment. And grandma and grandpa, it's okay. And our grandma and grandpa spoiling them. Well, visual impairment or not, they're probably going to spoil them. So let grandma and grandpa do what they feel is necessary to a point. You know what I mean? It just as if you had a child with or without a disability. But again, I think a lot of times, like, aunts and uncles have questions, and the parents are often just willing to say, like, hey, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say to my sister, and then you just say, you got to be honest and let me know if I can share something. Again, resources, share the resources. There's so many things out there that family can also use and read the same kinds of things that the parents are reading.
Right. And I sharing them gift ideas for, when the child's birthday is coming up, or maybe it's the holidays,
Right.
and they'll kind of, you might hear the comments like, well, they got this and it's not really appropriate, or they can't play with it, so I always like sharing different, like, if I find a new toy because another family has found this fabulous toy or something, and I'm like, oh, hey, you guys, like, I just want to share this with you, and you might want to pass this on to your mom or dad, or something, just so that they're not buying things that might not be completely appropriate for our kiddos. So I always like to help out in that area too. I think that's a common question I get, particularly around the holidays. Can you come up with a list of items that would be good for so and so? And it might just be Slinkies or light pen, or just like some simple, I think I froze, or did you freeze?
No, you're good.
Okay, good. But again, it might be some like really simple items, that's just working on some basic visual skills, or, again, it just depends where they're at. So I have a question here. Do you know of anyone working on developing free, high interest YouTube videos to teach the Braille code to kids and parents? Something with catchy songs and professional animation, or something else that's high interest, accessible, and geared for kids? I think that sounds like something for you, Sam, with your older games.
Okay, well, my Bible, they are cute. Have I ever sent them to you? I might have to. They're adorable. But anyways, I actually, funny that you mentioned that. My one student's dad keeps telling me, he's like, stop having these one-to-one, because like I'll call like this one meeting, the last one we had, it was his parents and the mom's parents and my child, and we just did it like Red Robin, like circle, right? And so we did this stuff, and he was like, why don't you, when he does something techie, he's like, why don't you like sell this? I'm like, because I'm not about selling everything. I'm trying to help you, and it's individualized to your child, right? And so he's been telling me now for about a year and a half that I'm crazy and I need to do something. As far as I know, there is not. I would love to come up with some cute Braille songs, because the current ones that are out there are not cute nor catchy. But as far as I know, I don't know anything that is like that. But I do know a couple of my families have said we should do something like that. I just don't think I'm the person to do that, because
You might have to team up or something, because I agree. Like this mom said, she's a young, she's a mom, she's got some young kids, and she knows about Hadley, the just enough to know better, but it's just the finding the time, to dive in and learn those. The only thing I can say is like the path to literacy and Hadley isn't Hadley self-paced?
it's self-paced, but it's like, here's your assignment. Like, read this, and then here's your homework assignment.
Yeah, I don't think it's real high interest. Yeah, I mean, it's basically learning Braille, and with paper, really. But I don't know if anybody's ever looked on YouTube for any of this. There's so much out there. There's a lot of young girls who, are on Instagram, and they're doing a lot of young visually impaired girls. I know a lot of my high school girls follow them, and they learn all sorts of things from these other visually impaired students. So, I mean, that is something to look at. Be interesting to see if there is anything out there.
Yeah.
I mean, the School for the Blind in Texas might have something on their website. Texas School for the Blind has a great website with all sorts of things. We have lots of O&M songs, and I know that the list of those songs, I think, are on that website too. Like they tell you, it's this tune and use these words. And so there might be something out there on Braille. I'm not as familiar.
Yes. And Julie Holland said that she's in the process of creating an O&M BICD. She would love to collaborate with others interested in the same, like Braille songs, cane songs, and more. Yeah, Julie, shoot me an email. You can get Sam and Carol involved.
I'll get suckered in. I'm not saying I won't. But you know who I am as a person. I'm all about this.
I know. I'd be about collaborating as well. It's not something that I'd want to take on, obviously, on my own, because I'm not really a creative person. But if somebody like we come up with something, I'd love to, do.
I love these ideas.
I would.
And another lady, Donna, she said, I'm thinking of how Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers brought education to kids from all zip codes. Our kids need something similar for Braille, including the contractions. Seems like what's out there is just for the alphabet. It's true.
It is true. There's one song with contractions. It's under the Frozen theme song. And as my one student told me, who is now in 5th grade, when he was going through it in 3rd grade, it was god awful. But I think the only problem that I see with that is I know for my students, when I'm teaching them Braille, I start with the letters of their name. So not even, that's why I do the file folder method of it, because I know for my one student, her beginning letters are L-A and N. And then my other student was G, A, B, and E. And so you can go through it, but the letters that they learn are always different in the beginning. So when you get to the contractions, you can definitely have this is all this group, like final letter signs and .46 contractions. But in the beginning, you wouldn't be able to just say A, B, and C, because A, B, and C doesn't mean something to every child. It really, truly has to be the letters of their name.
Right. And I would agree with that, because even when I do introduce Braille to children in early intervention, I always start with their name as well. And I do that because I'll talk to the TVIs that they'll be going in, and I always ask, how do you start it? Where, you know, what do you want me to start? And they always say, start with their name. So I do the
Also,
same.
for Donna and the one above her who had written about the Braille songs, the Facebook page, and there are several, but the TVI O&M one, I think, there's always teachers who are asking questions about teaching contractions and teaching Braille, and they always give their suggestions on like what they use. I can't think of what the word is right now. Like if they have a saying for remembering a certain contraction or a rule for Braille. So maybe if you put something on those pages, you'll find some other people, professionals who would love to help you with this.
Yeah, that would be good. Rebecca Sheffield says, oh yeah, okay, I can't say it. I'm not even gonna try because it's like the mundiest Monday ever. All right, and then Rebecca Sheffield said the Spin Rockers student duo at TSBVI has some great songs, including one about the jaw shortcuts. Maybe they'd be up for singing about the Braille code. Yeah.
Yeah, they have a fabulous website. You'll find everything, something there.
Mm-hmm. It just gives us more to think about. I think there's a lot that there's always more we can do for our families and for our students for sure. So I think as a parent, though, for the parents out there, one of the best things that I probably did, and it helped with time, was learning it with my son, like learning it as he learned it, you know. So as the flashcards came home or the games came home, you know, for him to like learn those letters and learn those contractions and those exercises, and just me doing it along with him, that was just helpful. I was going to sit alongside him to do his homework. You know, when they're that age, like kindergarten, first grade, you're typically, you know, sitting with them doing their homework anyway. So it wasn't extra time. And another, Donna, she says, my child was taught Braille using the natural order of Braille contractions method, and we saw Braille reading skills soar as a result. I am not familiar with that. Are you, Sam? Have you natural order through NLP?
I have a couple different programs that I bounce between depending on the child and what other needs they have. That's the one part that is hard. Like you can't just say you're pure like Marigold or any of those programs, because the child and the needs, when they're learning it, how much vision they have. I have students that are hypersensitive on their finger pads, so we have to desensitize them. There's no one program that works for everybody.
Right.
All right. Well, I do not have any more questions. I don't know if anybody in Zoom land has any more questions, or Sam or Carol Zoom land. If you guys have any additional comments, again, I thank you for taking the time out today and talking with us about the tough conversations. I always enjoy seeing you someday in person.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.